Well, on Undercurrents this week, over on the Undercurrents YouTube channel, I hosted Senator Eric Schmitt for a conversation about the election, just to do a sort of mood check, similar to what we did with Shelby earlier in the show. But Schmitt is a personal friend of J.D. Vance. They were called by CNN, or Schmitt was called by CNN, arguably his closest friend in the Senate. They were both entering around the same time and similar ages. So Schmitt's been campaigning with J.D. Vance. And I wanted to throw a couple of questions of him about what's happening behind the scenes of the campaign. And one question I had was just, the closing message of the Drain the Swamp movement in 2024 taking place at Madison Square Garden with a billionaire like Elon Musk, with Lutnick, so somebody who's a titan of Wall Street, lots of wealthy celebrities. And so I wanted to ask Senator Schmitt if he thinks that risks undermining the Drain the Swamp anti-establishment central message of the Trump campaign. Here's what he had to say. I do want to say, though, from the standpoint of someone kind of on the populist right, I wonder, that's where I'm coming from, I wonder if you think that Donald Trump's kind of drain the swamp message is at all undermined in the minds of voter when you're trotting out celebrities, billionaires from Silicon Valley, and also I think it was Howard Lutnick, the Wall Street kind of CEO. Does that hurt the drain the swamp message? Does it worry you as somebody who has come to this from a position of sort of an anti-establishment position when it comes to the economy as well? Is there anything to that?
I don't think so. I think it's bringing new people into the fold. I mean, one of the markers of the movement over the last, 6, 7, 8, almost 10 years now, is that new people have entered the process, right? They're frustrated with things that have happened. The system hasn't worked for them. So to the extent you've got like Elon Musk, who I think he's voted Democrat most of his life, or at least recently, he's seen the excesses of the left. He's seen what they really want to do. And I think that more than even R or D or red jersey or blue jersey, in some ways, where we're at now is kind of this permanent Washington Democrat allies in the media and Democrats themselves as this sort of alliance, this establishment alliance versus the disruptors, the people who want to see real change. And I think that bodes well in this election cycle that's seen as an election cycle. And Trump's viewed by like a 2-to-1 margin.
Okay, but remember the case Missouri v. Biden. That was kicked off by Eric Schmitt when he was the Attorney General of Missouri, which was pushing against censorship, obviously. And when it was changed into a bigger case, the Supreme Court ended up losing just in the last term. Donald Trump has been talking about his conversations with Google CEO, who's allegedly, according to Trump, been calling to kind of butter him up. And Matt Stoller, friend of the program, has been saying this is a worrying sign for MAGA populists. Let's listen to Eric Schmitt responding to a question about that. Trump also keeps mentioning the story about how the CEO of Google has called him a couple of times to say that his McDonald's trip was like through the roof on Google. They haven't seen searches like that forever. And some on the left have said, is this a sign that, Trump is warming up towards Google, that Google is warming up towards Trump? Some people have said that with the Washington Post non-endorsement as well, that Jeff Bezos didn't want to frustrate Donald Trump. You're kind of one of the antitrust guys. You've really helped the Republican Party get tougher on big tech in particular. Does any of that worry you? Do you worry that Donald Trump would go soft on big tech in another administration? Or is it sort of like what you said before? It's a bigger tent and a new coalition?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I think that, some of those big tech giants ought to be a little bit concerned because their behavior has been exposed. You mentioned kind of my role in that. When I was Attorney General in Missouri, we brought that Missouri versus Biden censorship lawsuit that exposed, even before the Twitter files. This was before Elon Musk bought Twitter. It was further amplified by the Twitter files. But what we found in the discovery in that case, this is back in 2022, was shocking. I mean, you had direct communications between high-ranking Biden administration officials with, vice presidents in these organizations that could control content. Take this down. Okay, we'll do it. What else can we do? I think kind of COVID exposed a lot of these excesses. People were shut down. They were shut out. They were tried to be silenced. The kind of counterculture tendency that a young person might have to be a contrarian. Look, the Democrats have adopted this position along with some of the biggest companies in the history of the world to kind of shut down and silence people. And you hear Elon Musk talk about it, JD talks about it, and others. But I certainly saw that firsthand in that lawsuit. So I'm not sure what their game plan is afterwards. But to the extent they're working with government or abusing their own rules to shut people down, they ought to be concerned, because we ought to have some reforms in that regard.
So nothing super explosive there, Ryan, but I do think some of these questions about Donald Trump's closing message involving, talking about getting buttered up by the Google CEO and cavorting with one of the most powerful men, if maybe the most powerful man in the entire world, a massive government contractor, somebody who's benefited from a lot of taxpayer subsidies, like Elon Musk has. It's a tension for sure in his messaging. And the other thing Schmidt said is that it feels, quote, more like 2016 than 2020 to him on the ground. He feels like this campaign is going in the right direction for Trump at the right time with about a week to go. And that's similar to what Shelby said she's hearing from the Trump camp internally. They're, quote, cautiously optimistic is what she reported here earlier in the show. So they don't seem to be worried that it's backfiring. But I don't know. I don't know.
I feel like Trump has just dropped a lot of the economic populism that J.D. Vance kind of likes. Like the best example was, to me, the speech he gave where his campaign advertised that he's going to go out and he's going to talk about how he's going to defend Social Security, he's going to defend Medicare, he's actually going to expand Medicare, he's even going to make the Affordable Care Act better. He's going to do tariffs, he's going to crack down on people who are ripping us off with our trade deficit. That was the theme of the speech, and it was written, and he read it from a teleprompter, but he would pause on the teleprompter every now and then to do a riff on the lurid details of victims of crime by illegal immigrants.
Right.
And when he would pause there, he would pause for a half an hour and just go in on that point, that issue, and he would become animated. Like, you could tell, like, this is the thing that was really getting him excited, and he felt like the crowd was with him on this one. And then he'd get back to, and I'll bring down your co-pays, and I'm going to go after big pharma, and I'm going to.
It actually reminds me of the Harris campaign in a way we talked about earlier, that they get really animated when they're talking about how Trump is a fascist, and then they kind of like, we'll get into the meat and potatoes too. Like everyone is really. I mean, it's understandable, right? Like everyone feels like this is an existential moment, and so they get really caught up in those particular arguments.
Yeah, and my right-wing populism can either be like this economic, nationalistic part of it that Steve Bannon has talked about, like, or it can be the other Steve Bannon element, which is just going after the other. And it feels like that they're leaning into the other.
Well, there's a Leninist component to what Steve Bannon wants to do in the kind of heighten the contradiction sense, meaning you have to otherize people, and then you open the gates to economic populism and economic revolution, which is an interesting way to look at it, because the risk is obviously that you otherize people, open up the gates, and then you just don't do any of the economic stuff because the corporate capture is so strong in Washington. And I mean, the Trump campaign is signaling that might genuinely be the dynamic if he has another administration, because to your point, he still talks about his potential 200% tariff. Like that's what he said at Madison Square Garden on certain items. They're trying to revive American manufacturing. You hear him talk about that stuff. But Stoller actually went back and looked at his speeches from 2016 and compared them to his speeches in 2024, and you can see pretty clearly when he pulls out excerpts that the economic populism of 2016 is muted this time around. It is just not a central feature of the messaging like it was in 2016.
Right, and Democrats were always dismissive of it and would joke that economic anxiety doesn't have anything to do with why people are supporting Trump, and that it's actually just code for racism and bigotry and xenophobia. But now you don't even get the code. Like
right.
he's stripped out the code. It's just the straight xenophobia.
Well, I mean, there's still, some of it is still there. It's just he's not.
Yeah, the tariff stuff's there.
It's a question as to
which
what
might be enough.
But that's what I think was interesting about the Eric Schmidt thing, is like the question is, what do they do? Like, is the messaging indicative of something that would happen differently? And Schmidt has talked about his potential attorney general. So for him not getting any of these questions, I mean, I thought it was important just to hear what he would say to that question, because nobody's asking those questions from the sort of conservative point of view. Like, are you abandoning what MAGA was supposed to be about on the economic front? It's just constantly taking Trump's bait and asking questions about culture war and blah, blah, blah. But they're not feeling the heat about what their voters might want to actually see them do if they take office. And
as you mentioned, the billionaires would rather they talk about immigrants.
And if you're outsourcing a department to Elon Musk, who has a million conflicts of interest, come on, there's some legitimate questions to be raised there.
Yeah. All right, so Friday show will be an actual show.
And it's exciting,
this coming
too.
Friday. We'll have Crystal and Sagar as well.
We are kindly hosting.
Last Friday before the election.
We're kindly hosting
do a real show.
We extended an invitation to Crystal and Sagar out of the kindness of our own hearts and said, hey, you guys, we're doing this show.
Join us.
You guys want to come on?
We'll get their take. They have good
get
takes.
some exposure.
Yes.
It'll be good to get them in front of people. People want to hear what they have to say, I'm sure.
Yep.
See these
if you want to hear them earlier
voices.
than that, they'll be back here tomorrow morning.
That's right, but that's our Friday show, and we've got all kinds of fun election coverage next week. So breakingpoints.com if you want to become a premium subscriber and support the show. Otherwise, we'll see you back here on Friday.
All right, see you then.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.